Higher Learning, 1995, was a film about young people colliding with racism, power, and violence on a college campus. Ironically, the cast's real lives followed a similar path. Some rose higher than expected, others disappeared without warning, and a few changed in ways that feel almost unrecognizable. Stay with us, because what happened next is not what anyone predicted. Omar Epps as Malik Williams. Omar Hashim Epps was born on July 20, 1973, in Brooklyn, New York. At 22 years old, he played Malik Williams, the driven black student-athlete navigating racism, anger, and fractured identity in Higher Learning, 1995. Malik felt real because Epps understood the emotional discipline required to survive hostile spaces. Life in Brooklyn did not teach him fear in sudden bursts, but in constant low-level tension. His father's departure fractured the household early, leaving instability that lingered quietly through adolescence and into adulthood. In neighborhoods shaped by crime and drugs, safety depended on awareness and emotional control, not confrontation. Over time, that vigilance hardened into habit, producing resilience on the surface while carving a persistent sense of isolation underneath. When recognition arrived through Juice and later Love and Basketball, the environment changed, but the pressure did not. Visibility brought a new form of scrutiny, where each role carried expectations heavier than the character itself. He was no longer judged only on performance, but on representation. During his long run on House MD, that sustained pressure began to surface physically, with chronic migraines emerging as the body's response to years of contained stress. Marriage provided structure, but not escape. His relationship with singer Keisha Spivey required patience forged through conflicting schedules, public attention, and emotional fatigue. Parenthood deepened that responsibility, forcing him to confront absence from a position he once endured himself. Today, Omar Epps is 53 years old and remains active across film, television, writing, and advocacy. With an estimated net worth of around $8 million, his success reflects longevity more than spectacle. His story is less about escape than about controlled endurance. Kristy Swanson as Kristen Connor. Kristy Swanson was born on December 19, 1969, in Mission Viejo, California. At 26 years old, she played Kristen Connor, a young woman unraveling under desire, confusion, and violation, in Higher Learning, 1995. The role required emotional exposure without protection. It stripped away the distance fame had previously allowed her to maintain. Pressure entered her life early and stayed. Acting and modeling replaced ordinary childhood rhythms, turning approval into something conditional rather than assumed. Auditions replaced play, mirrors replaced privacy, and self-evaluation became habitual. As opportunities increased, so did internal doubt, creating a loneliness that praise never managed to resolve. Breakthrough recognition, through Buffy the Vampire Slayer, brought visibility, but not security. As Hollywood's priorities shifted, momentum slowed, and rejection arrived without explanation or closure. Higher Learning demanded vulnerability that lingered beyond the set, reopening emotional fractures rather than healing them. Later projects, including The Phantom, failed to restore footing, reinforcing a sense of disposability within an industry that once celebrated her. Personal relationships absorbed that same instability. Early partnerships collapsed under public exposure, leaving emotional residue that followed her into marriage. Though she later built a life with Lloyd Eisler, trust had to be reconstructed carefully rather than assumed. At the same time, chronic Lyme disease quietly reshaped daily life, draining energy and turning routine tasks into negotiations with pain. Now, Kristy Swanson is 57 years old and lives largely outside Hollywood's center. With an estimated net worth of around $5 million, her priorities now favor distance over visibility. She did not disappear. She recalibrated. Sometimes survival requires stepping away from the stage entirely. Michael Rapaport as Remy. Michael David Rapaport was born on March 20th, 1970 in Manhattan, New York. At 25 years old, he played Remy, the volatile student whose frustration curdles into violent extremism in Higher Learning, 1995. The performance unsettled audiences because it felt like a progression that had already begun long before the story reached its breaking point. His early years were marked by instability that quietly rewired his emotional responses. The collapse of his parents' marriage removed any sense of grounding just as he was learning how to understand himself. School became a hostile space, where ridicule over his appearance and temperament turned embarrassment into defensiveness. Being expelled and forced to restart elsewhere reinforced the belief that he was already labeled, already dismissed, already unwanted. Over time, anger became less of an emotion and more of a posture. That posture followed him into adulthood and into his work. Even as acting opportunities arrived through Zebrahead and later Prison Break, conflict seemed unavoidable, not because of talent, but temperament. Playing Remy did not invent his rage, it organized it. The backlash that followed the film, from both critics and viewers disturbed by the character, fed directly into his existing anxiety. Public debate, online hostility, and professional tension merged into a constant state of agitation that eventually surfaced as depression and emotional volatility. His personal life echoed that same pattern of friction. Marriage to writer and producer Nicole Beatty initially promised stability, but unresolved emotional habits strained the relationship until it ended in divorce in 2007. Fatherhood brought responsibility, yet it also magnified the fear of repeating cycles he never truly escaped. A later marriage to actress Kibe Dunn offered structure, but the work of emotional regulation remained ongoing rather than resolved. By 2026, Michael Rapaport is 56 years old, continuing to act while channeling his confrontational energy into podcasting. With an estimated net worth of around $6 million, his career survives through persistence rather than reinvention. He remains outspoken, restless, and polarizing, not because the past still haunts him, but because it never fully loosened its grip. Ice Cube as Fudge White O'Shea. Jackson was born on June 15, 1969 in Los Angeles, California. At 26 years old, he played Fudge White, the disciplined black student leader navigating power, responsibility, and restraint in Higher Learning, 1995. The character's calm authority carried an undercurrent of controlled fury. That tension was not performed, it was familiar. Growing up in South Central Los Angeles meant absorbing violence as background noise rather than shock. Death arrived early, often, and without ceremony, claiming friends and neighbors through drugs, gangs, and systemic neglect. Poverty and racial hostility were not abstract ideas, but daily pressures that narrowed options and hardened outlooks. Music became his method of survival, and of course, writing lyrics was how grief learned to speak. Fame through NWA and Straight Outta Compton transformed that rage into a public weapon, but visibility came with isolation. Leaving the group fractured alliances and exposed him to attacks that painted him as both traitor and threat. Albums like Death Certificate and The Predator sharpened his voice, but deepened the emotional toll. When he crossed into film with Boys in the Hood and later Friday, accusations followed. Claims that he had traded activism for acceptance. Each step forward carried a price. Marriage to Kimberly Woodruff in 1992 offered grounding amid chaos, yet stability did not eliminate strain. Touring schedules, public controversy, and the burden of being both cultural symbol and private man tested the relationship repeatedly. Raising children under constant scrutiny forced him to confront the environment he once rapped against, now as a father determined to shield rather than react. Today, Ice Cube is 57 years old, standing as a figure whose influence spans music, film, and business. With an estimated net worth of around $160 million, his success reflects control wrested from disorder. From NWA to the Big Three League, his career has been defined by confrontation transformed into structure. Jennifer Connelly as Taryn Jennifer Lynn. Connelly was born on December 12, 1970, in Round Top, New York. At 25 years old, she played Taryn, a quiet, observant college student navigating desire, consent, and emotional boundaries in Higher Learning, 1995. The role demanded restraint rather than confrontation, vulnerability rather than spectacle. It fit her more closely than audiences realized at the time. Her early life unfolded under pressure disguised as opportunity. Entering the modeling world at just 10 years old meant growing up under constant scrutiny, where appearance became currency and approval was never unconditional. Frequent moves between rural New York and the city fractured any sense of stability, replacing childhood spontaneity with discipline and isolation. While the camera adored her stillness, it quietly taught her to suppress uncertainty rather than express it. That internal tension followed her into adulthood and into her work. Films like Requiem for a Dream and later A Beautiful Mind demanded emotional excavation, forcing her to revisit vulnerability she had learned to manage rather than resolve. Despite critical acclaim and an Academy Award, she struggled against being reduced to beauty rather than depth, a creative constraint that bred frustration even at the height of success. Professional recognition did not automatically translate into emotional ease. Marriage offered companionship, but not immunity from strain. Her relationship with actor Paul Bettany required negotiation across distance, demanding schedules, and the shared burden of raising children under public observation. Postpartum anxiety surfaced quietly, complicating moments that were expected to feel purely joyful. Rather than retreating, she learned to slow down, choosing projects selectively and prioritizing psychological steadiness over constant visibility. Now, Jennifer Connelly is 56 years old and continues working as a respected Oscar-winning actress across film and television. With an estimated net worth of around $50 million, her success reflects longevity and discernment rather than excess. She remains present not by pushing harder, but by protecting the inner balance she once lacked. Tyra Banks as Deja Tyra Lynn. Banks was born on December 4, 1973, in Inglewood, California. At 22 years old, she played Deja, a young woman caught between self-discovery and exploitation, in Higher Learning, 1995. The role marked her transition from modeling into acting, placing her in emotionally charged terrain early. What appeared confident on screen masked deep vulnerability off it. Her childhood was shaped by disruption rather than glamour. Her parents' divorce at age 6 fractured emotional security, while rapid physical growth made her a target for ridicule rather than admiration. Being labeled too tall and too thin carved self-doubt into her adolescence, long before fashion would later celebrate those same traits. Confidence, when it arrived, was constructed deliberately rather than inherited. Modeling brought visibility, but also confrontation. Breaking barriers as the first black woman on the covers of GQ and Sports Illustrated came with isolation and constant pressure to represent more than herself. Even as she built America's Next Top Model and earned multiple Daytime Emmy Awards, she faced resistance in business spaces dominated by male authority. Success demanded not just talent, but endurance against dismissal. Her personal life mirrored that complexity. She never married, but long-term relationships unfolded under relentless public curiosity, amplifying private strain. Fertility struggles introduced another layer of grief, forcing her to confront loss quietly while maintaining a public image of strength. Motherhood arrived through surrogacy, reshaping her understanding of control, patience, and vulnerability. By 2026, Tyra Banks is 53 years old and remains an influential entrepreneur across television, fashion, and cosmetics. With an estimated net worth of around $90 million, Her legacy extends beyond fame into ownership and authorship of her narrative. Regina King as Monet. Regina Renee King was born on January 15, 1971, in Los Angeles County, California. At 24 years old, she played Monet, a sharp-tongued, politically conscious black student who refuses to soften her anger in Higher Learning, 1995. The character stood her ground in a hostile academic space, never apologizing for her clarity. It was a role that felt confrontational because it carried lived truth beneath the dialogue. Her emotional framework was shaped early by fracture rather than comfort. Her parents' divorce dismantled any illusion of permanence, leaving her mother to shoulder financial responsibility alone while raising two daughters. Instability was not dramatic, but persistent, settling into daily life as quiet anxiety about money, security, and belonging. Even as she trained in dance and acting, the awareness that safety could disappear at any moment never fully left her. That tension followed her into Hollywood, where visibility did not equal value. After 227 and films like Boys in the Hood, she discovered that being talented was not enough to guarantee opportunity, especially as a black woman expected to wait patiently for permission. Roles arrived slowly, recognition slower still, demanding endurance rather than momentum. It was only decades later, with If Beale Street Could Talk, that her emotional precision was finally honored at the highest level. Marriage briefly offered the promise of grounding, but betrayal dissolved that stability. Her union with Ian Alexander Sr. ended painfully, leaving her to navigate motherhood alongside public success and private disappointment. She poured herself into raising her son, building a bond that became the emotional center of her life. That bond was shattered in 2022 when her son, Ian Jr., died by suicide, a loss that collapsed time, certainty, and identity all at once. Today, Regina King is 55 years old and continues working as an actress, director, and producer, carrying both acclaim and grief in equal measure. With an estimated net worth of around $16 million, her achievements stand beside an irreversible personal wound. Jason Wiles as Wayne. Jason Austin Wiles was born on April 25, 1970 in Kansas City, Missouri. At 25 years old, he played Wayne, a quiet, peripheral figure observing the ideological chaos around him, in Higher Learning, 1995. The role did not demand volume, but presence. It marked his early entry into a world that rarely offers clear trajectories. His upbringing was comparatively stable, yet that stability dissolved when ambition intervened. Leaving the Midwest for Hollywood meant shedding familiarity without gaining immediate support, trading community for uncertainty. Early adulthood unfolded in isolation, shaped by auditions, rejection, and the pressure to justify risk. Loneliness became less an emotion than an environment he learned to function within. Career momentum arrived gradually, not explosively. Third Watch finally gave him visibility, but success brought a different frustration, being recognized for one role while overlooked for others. Typecasting narrowed perception, limiting opportunity even as his skill deepened. Writing and directing became acts of reclamation, allowing him to assert authorship when acting alone could not. Marriage provided emotional continuity, but not immunity from strain. Balancing family life with the unpredictability of television schedules tested patience and presence. Parenthood grounded him, yet the tension between availability and ambition never fully resolved. Stability required conscious effort, sustained through compromise rather than certainty. Today, Jason Wiles is 56 years old and continues working steadily in television while pursuing independent creative projects. With an estimated net worth of around $1.5 million, his career reflects persistence more than spectacle. His story unfolds not as a rise, but as a long, deliberate endurance. Cole Hauser as Scott Moss. Cole. Kenneth Hauser was born on March 22, 1975 in Santa Barbara, California. At 20 years old, he played Scott Moss, the cold, violent leader of a white supremacist group, in Higher Learning, 1995. The role was designed to repel rather than invite sympathy. It marked him early with an image few young actors willingly carry. His childhood unfolded in motion rather than stability. His parents' divorce severed any clear sense of home, forcing him to move repeatedly across states while watching adulthood fracture around him. Being the son of actor Wings Hauser brought proximity to Hollywood, but not protection from its pressure. The expectation to follow a lineage weighed heavily, especially without a consistent paternal presence during his formative years. That internal displacement shaped his early career choices. Roles in School Ties and Dazed and Confused positioned him near rising stars, yet rarely at the center. Playing extremists, soldiers, and morally hard figures became a pattern, culminating in Higher Learning, where the character's hatred fused uncomfortably with his public perception. The tension between craft and consequence lingered, narrowing opportunity even as his performances sharpened. Marriage introduced a counterweight to that instability. His relationship with Cynthia Daniel offered a private world untouched by Hollywood volatility, grounding him through parenthood and routine. Family life did not erase ambition, but it softened its urgency, allowing him to endure the long stretches of professional invisibility without abandoning the craft. Stability became something he actively chose rather than assumed. Now, Cole Hauser is 51 years old and experiencing renewed prominence through Yellowstone, where his portrayal of Rip Wheeler reframed him as both feared and fiercely loyal. With an estimated net worth of around $10 million, his success arrived late but decisively. Busta Rhymes as Dreads. Trevor George Smith, Jr. was born on May 20th, 1972 in Brooklyn, New York. At 23 years old, he appeared as Dreads, a volatile, restless presence on the edges of campus life, in Higher Learning, 1995. The role was brief but charged, mirroring the tension he carried off-screen. It arrived while his identity was still anchored more in rhythm than cinema. His early years were shaped by compression and survival. Growing up in Brooklyn as the child of Jamaican immigrants meant absorbing street violence, financial instability, and constant vigilance before adolescence ended. Movement between New York and England fractured any sense of permanence, while proximity to gangs and street culture blurred lines between protection and danger. That urgency propelled his rise with leaders of the new school and later as a solo force. Albums like The Coming transformed him into a kinetic presence in hip-hop, earning critical acclaim and repeated Grammy nominations without the validation of a win. Balancing music dominance with film appearances created friction, as acting never offered the same control or clarity as the microphone. The pull between mediums reflected a deeper struggle for focus rather than ambition. His personal life unfolded without traditional structure. Never marrying, he became the father of 6 children across multiple relationships, navigating custody, financial strain, and public scrutiny simultaneously. Legal troubles and health battles, including severe weight gain and eventual bariatric surgery, exposed the physical cost of decades lived at maximum intensity. Today, Busta Rhymes is 54 years old and continues to command respect as a veteran artist, releasing music and performing with undiminished force. With an estimated net worth of around $20 million, his legacy rests not on trophies, but endurance. Lawrence Fishburne as Professor Maurice Phipps. Lawrence John Fishburne III was born on July 30th, 1961, in Augusta, Georgia. At 34 years old, he played Professor Maurice Phipps, the composed, morally grounded voice amid ideological chaos, in Higher Learning, 1995. The role carried authority rather than spectacle. It arrived at a moment when his public image was still forming, not yet monumental. His childhood was defined by fracture and restraint. After his parents' divorce, he was raised by his mother in New York, where financial pressure and emotional distance became constants rather than exceptions. His father's presence was limited to brief, scheduled encounters, leaving questions that matured into quiet anger rather than rebellion. Poverty was not dramatic, but persistent, shaping a boy who learned early to observe rather than trust. Acting offered structure, but not refuge. Entering the industry as a child exposed him to adult environments long before emotional readiness, a reality that hardened him quickly. Films like Apocalypse Now demanded maturity while denying childhood, forcing him to grow up inside chaos rather than beyond it. The discipline that later defined his career was born not from ambition, but survival. Marriage did not soften that internal vigilance. His early union with Hajna O. Moss ended in separation, leaving emotional scars shaped by youth and instability. His later marriage to Gina Torres offered partnership and public grace, yet even that union dissolved quietly after years of shared life, reinforcing a pattern of intimacy followed by loss. Stability for Fishburne was never permanent, it was provisional. By 2026, Lawrence Fishburne is 65 years old and regarded as a living pillar of American cinema. With an estimated net worth of around $30 million, his legacy rests not on wealth, but endurance, spanning The Matrix and decades of stage and screen authority. He did not escape hardship. He absorbed it, transformed it, and taught generations how restraint can carry more power than force. Bradford English, as Officer Bradley, James Bradford. English Jr. was born on January 16, 1942, in South Orange, New Jersey. At 53 years old, he played Officer Bradley, a minor but steady institutional presence in Higher Learning, 1995. The role passed quietly, almost unnoticed. That anonymity reflected a career built on visibility without recognition. His early life unfolded in the long shadow of post-war America, where stability was promised but rarely guaranteed. Growing up in an era that offered little security to aspiring performers, he learned early that talent alone did not ensure survival. Financial uncertainty lingered, pushing him toward pragmatism rather than dream-chasing optimism. That reality followed him into adulthood. While he appeared in respected films like The Onion Field and later became recognizable to horror audiences through Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers, his work remained fragmented. Television guest roles on shows like NYPD Blue and Seinfeld kept him employed but never anchored. Each job reset the clock, forcing him to start over again and again. Marriage became his emotional constant. His life with Cecilia Brennan spanned decades, raising 4 children while balancing unpredictable income and professional invisibility. The strain was quiet but cumulative, built from long absences, uncertain futures, and a career that never stabilized. Longevity replaced ambition, survival replacing expectation. Sadly, Bradford English passed away on October 25, 2024, in Pasadena, California, at the age of 82, likely from age-related causes. With an estimated net worth of around $1 million, his legacy is not measured in fame but persistence. He did not rise. He endured, leaving behind a body of work that whispered rather than shouted, and a life that proved how many careers exist just beyond the spotlight. Higher Learning was never just a film about college. It was about identity, pain, and the choices that shape who we become long after the classroom fades away. 3 decades later, the cast carries those stories in ways the screen could never show. Which transformation surprised you the most, and whose story deserves a deeper look? Leave a comment, subscribe for more untold Hollywood journeys, and don't forget to like this video if these stories stayed with you.